Hello ladies and gentlemen of the world. My name is Zach Jones. Welcome back to my channel, but if you're new to my channel then welcome. I'm re-recording the 16 Animals of Australia PowerPoints, and Australia is a continent country that's well known and in fact legendary for its animals, particularly its venomous ones, and there's going to be a lot of them. But I'm going to start off with the largest land carnivore in Australia. It is the dingo. Now, dingoes were not actually native to Australia originally. They're actually descendants of wolves that were brought over from Asia by human visitors over 4,000 years ago. But they have evolved to become the continent's top land predator. They hunt a wide variety of things. I mean, their favourite prey is red or grey kangaroos, but they also hunt wallabies and birds, small mammals, lizards, reptiles, frogs, pretty much anything they can catch. But despite what the legends say, they do not eat human babies. That is just a ridiculous story. Dingoes, they look a little bit like domestic dogs, but they are very different. And like wolves, they live in packs and they hunt as packs. In fact, this one right here, a white dingo, that was actually filmed on 7 Worlds, 1 Planet in 2019, and it was then that we actually got to see how dingoes hunt, because the white dingo was the leader of a pack, and what she was doing was they were hunting kangaroos, which are, well, of course, their favourite food. But kangaroos are not very easy to catch because they can run as fast as a racehorse, and on open ground they can outrun a dingo, and as many people know, their huge hind legs can deliver a powerful kick. But what the dingoes do, well, just like with wolves, is they test the herd. They check to see if there's an animal in there that's old, young, weak, injured or sick, or if it's mothers with joeys in their pouches. Of course, dingoes have to catch at least once or twice a day, and that's to provide for their pups. And of course, they have many tactics. In fact, one of them is to have some dingoes running around the herd of like kangaroos to unsettle them and see if there's any weaker individuals, and then they go in for the kill. Of course, dingoes have lived in Australia for over 4,000 years, and unfortunately, just over 200 years ago, European settlers arrived in Australia with livestock, guns, dogs, cats, foxes, badgers, weasels and rats. And they decimated much of Australia's unique wildlife, and dingoes are, to this day, still Australia's most heavily persecuted animal. To this day, because the European settlers considered them a threat to livestock, and it is very rare dingoes do go for livestock. But even so, to this day, dingoes continue to be shot, poisoned and trapped, and that's made them very shy and very elusive and very afraid of people, and they try to avoid us as much as possible. But also, dingoes unfortunately have been interbreeding with stray dogs, and that's kind of mixing the genes a little, and it's causing a few problems in the wild population. But they aren't endangered. I mean, they are considered vulnerable, but of course people rarely see them because they're very hard to find, and very shy and elusive and avoid people. And also, if you ever do go near dingoes, they're not aggressive unless they're frightened, cornered, or are protecting pups, or even more so if they're incredibly hungry. course, this is the range of the dingoes. Now, next I'm going to show you all probably the most venomous snake on the planet. It is the fierce snake, also known as the inland taipan. Now, this animal is probably the most venomous snake on the planet, and of course it can grow to be probably just over 2 meters long, but it has the strongest venom of any snake around. And it has enough venom in one bite to kill 100 people and its prey in seconds. But it is not for attacking human beings. The inland taipan is a snake that, to my knowledge, has never before killed a human being. But what it does is it has venom that it uses to bring down and kill a rodent like a rat in seconds, because where it lives in the Australian outback is because it lives out in the desert of Australia, and that tends to be very, very hot and very dry, and a lot of the time the inland taipan spends its time in the burrows of rodents like rats, where it can quite possibly feed on 3 or 4 in a day. And what it has to do is it has to bite them, inject enormous amounts of very, very toxic venom, and stop them moving within seconds. And the venom of this snake is very complex, but the main constituent part is what's called neurotoxin. That is the toxin that affects the nervous system, the heart, the lungs, and the respiratory system. To put it in perspective, like those little glass globes with the electricity pulsing around them, you put your hand on it and then electricity comes to parts of your hand. I can't quite remember the name of those things, but that is basically what the nervous system is. Is the part of the brain that sends out electrical signals to the body in order to move. And neurotoxin attacks the nervous system, and if the nervous system fails, then it's basically game over. And of course, this is one of the hardest snakes in the world to find. It's very shy, very elusive, and like many animals in the desert of Australia, it's only out for a few hours in the early morning to warm up before it gets too hot. Because snakes, like many reptiles, are so-called cold-blooded, so they need the sun's warmth in order to get enough energy to be mobile. And of course here, as you can see, there's Steve Backshall, and he actually went to Australia and he actually saw an inland taipan. And of course it did everything it could to try and get him to keep his distance, which he did, of course. And it didn't even strike to bite him at all. All it did was give mock strikes, which is quite often used to drive away a predator like a dingo or something like that. And although this is a snake that has never before, to my knowledge, killed a human being, they are still used for anti-venom, which is made from the venom of other animals, and that is used to save someone who's been bitten by a venomous animal. So if you are ever bitten by an inland taipan, which might not happen, a trip to the hospital and a dose of anti-venom and you'd be right as rain. However, it would still hurt a lot. And if, of course, it doesn't attack people, but its venom, as I said, this has the strongest venom of any snake, and its venom is powerful enough to kill 250,000 rats at a single sitting, which is why they gave it the name fierce snake. Of course, here is the range of this snake, also the coastal and western desert taipans. And now I'm going to show you all the venomous snakes of Australia. Well, the most venomous ones. There's the inland taipan, then there's the eastern brown snake, and brown snakes are probably the most feared in Australia. There's the coastal taipan, western brown snake, the mulga snake, the tiger snake, which I will be showing you a bit later, the red-bellied black snake, the death adder, which is the fastest striking snake, the lowland copperhead, the rough-scaled snake, the collared snake, and the small-eyed snake. And now I'm going to show you all probably the strangest animal on the planet. It is the duck-billed platypus. Now, as I probably haven't mentioned, Australia is full of weird animals. Well, weird if you're more used to foxes and badgers, but the platypus is probably the weirdest animal on the planet. And it's got the body and tail of a beaver, and webbed feet and a beak like a duck. And the platypus's beak is full of electroreceptors, which is its main sense of electroreception. But also, platypus are also venomous, because they have a spike on their foot that connects to a venom gland, and if a platypus stings you with that, it will really hurt. And another peculiar thing about the platypus is that, unlike many mammals that give birth to live young, or like marsupials grow their young inside a pouch on the mother's belly, platypus don't give birth to live young or carry their young in a pouch. Instead, they lay eggs like birds or reptiles. But probably the most incredible thing about the platypus is how it hunts, because it even does it with its eyes shut. But that's not because it's trying to give its prey a sporting chance. It just doesn't need to use its eyes, because the sense organs in its beak are a lot like a metal detector, and what the platypus does is it goes down on a single breath, and it will scan across the bottom of a lake, a river, a stream, or an estuary, and it's mainly hunting for fish and invertebrates like beetles and other insects in the water, but mainly crustaceans like crabs and crayfish. And if a crayfish so much as twitches, it gives off a signal that the platypus can pick up, and then boom, it's dinner time. Of course, platypus are one of the most peculiar animals, but they are very difficult to see. I mean, they're mostly active at dusk and dawn, which makes them crepuscular, but also they're only at the surface for like a couple of seconds and then they completely disappear. A few years ago, platypus almost disappeared in the wild because they were taken from the wild for the illegal pet trade, but also pollution of the waterways where they live was a problem. But that has since stopped, and platypus have made a recovery, but they are still very difficult to see, and to this day they are probably the strangest animal in the world. Here is the range of the platypus. Now for the next animal, I've had to swallow my fear on this one, because I can't do an Australian PowerPoint without including at least one spider from Australia, so I've chosen probably the most well-known and feared. It is the redback spider. Now, this is one of the most feared spiders in the world. In some other parts of the world, this is known as the black widow, but in Australia it's called a redback. Arachnophobia, which is the fear of spiders, is probably the most common fear in the world, and I myself am arachnophobic, but as I said, I had to swallow my fear and just do something, just include spider, because I can't do a PowerPoint on Australia without including spiders.